Claudia and I, drafting this chapter, discussed how Colombia offers a bit of a puzzle because we have a state that is very limited in terms of institutional capacity, and yet it has become one of the most inclusive hosts of Venezuelan migrants in the world. And that is because since 2014, nearly 8 million Venezuelans have left their country, and around 2.8 million settled in Colombia in the span of only 4 years. And of them, approximately 29%, nearly a third, are children and adolescents. So that is nearly 800,000 Venezuelan minors. So, in response to that, Colombia, for a series of reasons we tried to identify in that chapter, adopted in 2021 the Estatuto Temporal de Protección para Migrantes Venezolanos, a TPS, for those who are familiar with that term. So, this TPS, unprecedented in the history of Latin America, created a large-scale regularization pathway for Venezuelans living in Colombia, regularly or irregularly, before January 21, as well as those who decided to enter the country through official checkpoints until November 2023. And by granting a temporary legal status lasting over a decade, the Colombian state really facilitated access to basic rights and services, including, of course, education. The scale of educational inclusion has been both remarkable and overwhelming. Venezuelan enrollment in Colombian schools rose from 34,000 in 2018 to more than 600,000 by 2024. And Venezuelan students today represent more than 6% of Colombia's enrollment in its public education system. And so this, of course, raises the central question of our chapter, and that is, why does a state with such limited capacity adopt such generous, inclusive policies, and how does it manage migrant inclusion in education? So I pass it over to Claudia.
Thank you, Daniel. So to address these questions, we used migration and state theory, which comes from political science. And this framework highlights the tensions that the state faces between economic demands, so the need for labor, rights commitments, and the anti-immigrant pressures that sometimes arise in several countries. So this framework is usually more tailored to Western countries. So we adopt a series of amendments to test different hypotheses that explain this behavior from Colombia, including post-colonial state building. So the idea that Colombia might be welcoming of these Venezuelan people because they are similar to our identity and that will contribute to our identity building. Or the idea that the second hypothesis that Colombia will be looking for rent seeking through hosting migrants in Colombia and preventing them to go somewhere else, or the idea that there is a rights-based coalition maybe in the country or the courts pushing for these rights to be granted to migrants and refugees, or finally, the influence of international pressures combined with the weak enforcement of formal rights, which is available to do or feasible to do in democracies that are not as consolidated. And what we find, this is probably a spoiler alert, is that the Colombia's response was driven by a contingent alignment of international and domestic incentives. So international pressures and the search for legitimacy for a country that has gone through or that has been accused for violating human rights by a long time. And then the rights-based policy that were like the government looking for that, while domestic political dynamics were present that reinforced them. Specifically, a right-wing government trying to receive Venezuelans as a way to say, this is what happened to the country if we go through the same route. So all in all, our key contribution is to show that the Colombian state is not unified because they receive these migrants, but at the same time, they shift the responsibility for the implementation of rights to different parts of the state, and in the case of education, to the schools. So it's not that they were received, but that was that was everything that they do. So we show this fragmentation of the bureaucratic institutions shaped by competing pressures. And we believe that this perspective demonstrates that education policy for migrants and refugees cannot be understood in isolation, but must be analyzed through the fragmentation of migration governance and the tensions between right commitments, political incentives, and resource constraints. And that's it.